Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace.
So something I want to talk about today. I had this question about selling or entering into agreement with somebody who is looking for a guarantee of some sort. And this person I was talking to had kind of gone through the process. They had some really good discovery conversations to understand what it was that this prospect needed. They felt like they were getting close to the finish line to ink this deal and start moving forward in terms of working together. And then the big question came along, which is, okay, how are you going to guarantee that we're going to be successful? And I think this is not an uncommon scenario that people bump up against. Everyone's trying to reduce their risk. So let's talk through how to approach answering that inquiry in an environment where, you may or may not be in the position to really guarantee a result.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's important to understand what the client's really asking when they ask that question. And they're not really asking, whether they use the term guarantee or not. There's a few ways they can ask that question. What are the guarantees this is going to work? Do you have any guarantees? What assurances can you give me this is going to be effective? How do I know we're going to get the results we're looking for? So sometimes they use that word guarantee, which is a trigger for a lot of sellers, right? Sometimes they don't, but they're asking fundamentally the same thing. Is like, how do I know it's going to work, and how can you de-risk this for me? Is what they're really asking without using a technical term like de-risk.
So let's just stop there for a moment, because practically speaking, I think you're pointing at something really important, which is when you get asked that question, the thing not to do is to, yeah, exactly. It's to immediately start calculating, okay, how can I decide, how can I tell them, how can I give them this, level of comfort that it sounds like they're looking for? And this is a common conversation that we have every time we talk about, this discovery or sales conversation, which is now's the time actually just to get curious and to really understand what's going on. Because especially as this often happens near the end of the process, or when it feels like you're getting to the end, it is easy just to immediately kind of take that as a question that must be answered. So I think first thing first, set that aside. And then yes, next thing is, how do we figure out what they're really asking?
Well, because there's an emotional need behind that question, and that's the thing. And what they're looking for is not your, the guarantee terminology in your agreement and how you'll stand behind the engagement and what are your refund terms and what. They're not really looking for that. I mean, they may want that at some point, but what they're really looking for is how can you satisfy the emotional need that I have to feel safe, or to feel like I'm entering into an agreement with somebody credible and trustworthy, or to feel like I'm not going to put in all this effort with you only to find out that I wasted my time, whatever that looks like for them. But there is some kind of an emotional need behind the question. It could be safety, could be about the use of their resources, could be about not wanting to waste time, could be about questioning whether you're the right partner, and the list can go on, right? And so I think the important thing to do up front is, to your point, seek clarity. And that could be as simple as asking the question, I'm curious, what do you mean by that? Or I'm curious, where's that coming from? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by a guarantee? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for in terms of assurances? And have a deeper conversation outside of that one or two specific terms or that one statement to better understand, well, what's really driving this question? And you should have a hunch, by the way. If you've done discovery well, you should have a hunch of where that's coming from already.
And how often do you think that kind of question or that kind of emotional need could have been resolved earlier in the process versus how often it just exists regardless of how you lead the client through the discovery and the conversation?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. Like, in an ideal world, when discovery is done perfectly, there are no objections. because discovery preempts every objection. That's also very impractical, right? Because we have time limits. I can't have a 3-hour discovery conversation with you before I make you an offer. Well, depending on the nature of the offer, maybe I can. But for most people, there are some very hard limits on how much time they and the client would like to spend on discovery before we get into the brass tacks of how we can work together. So yeah, in an ideal world, if discovery is done perfectly and time constraints are not a factor, there are no objections by the end. Discovery is an imperfect, process in science. Certainly it can be better with the right framework, and time constraints are real. So sometimes you can't cover everything, and invariably objections will come up, and this is one of them.
Yeah. Do you think there's a way to mitigate this particular version of objection?
Yeah, it's by having a conversation in discovery before getting into the offer around what might go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So where do they see the risks? Where are they concerned? What are the risks of doing things the way that they've been doing them?
Mm-hmm.
What are the consequences of continuing to go down the path that they're currently going down? Because there's risks everywhere. And when you put an offer in front of a client, they're going to start thinking about the risks of going down your path, working with you. But you want them to also be anchored in the risks of going down a different path, i.e. not working with you, working with somebody else, or doing it on their own altogether. That also carries risks. And now we can contextualize the risks of working with you against the risks of not working with you and see which one's greater. And often it's obviously the risk of doing nothing or not working with you or working with somebody else is going to be a far greater risk, but they need to see that for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And so let's assume that the discovery has been relatively effective, and we're now at this point where the question has been dropped.
Yeah. So
how to handle it in the moment.
Understand where they're coming from and have that conversation. And then what you need to do is help the client self-identify the risks that they're concerned about. So I did this recently. And the question was, can you tell me specifically where you're concerned that this thing goes wrong? I'm not interested in having a general conversation about risk, a broad conversation about risk. That's not going to yield anything tangible or specific enough to be actionable. I want to know, in this process and in this engagement that we described, in this sequence of activities we've now talked about, where we said we'll do X, Y, and Z in this way, in this sequence, with this model, show me the risk. And it's okay. And I think also creating a sense of safety here, right? Like it's okay. That actually the first thing I did when I had this conversation is I said, fantastic question. And I'm glad you asked it. And I'll tell you why. Because what we find is the clients who get the best results are the ones that have the highest degree of confidence going into the engagement. And if you have concerns as to whether it's not going to work, we would encourage that conversation now up front, so that if we do work together, you go into it with a high degree of confidence. So give them the space and give them the safety to have this conversation with you, and then force them to pinpoint where the risk lies. Show it to me.
Yeah, and I would even take it one step farther, which is then once that is clear, digging around to have them define why that risk is important to them. So, I'm worried that this may not happen in the timeline that we've laid out. Okay. There's your specific risk, if that's what you think it is. Why is that important? What would happen if, for some reason, the timeline was extended? Because what you're likely to find is, especially if they're in a larger organization, right? Or B2B, you're speaking to corporations often. Well, then that would mean that, my reputation in my role could be threatened in some way, or that would mean that, I don't meet my particular objective that has to happen within a certain time frame, or, right, whatever it may be. And they may not be able to or be willing to tell you that overtly, but the closer you can get to understanding, like, what is it that's actually making their stomach churn a little bit, right? Because it's the thing that is going to have them jump in with both feet or not isn't going to be in most cases, your very factual assurances, it's going to be helping them get past whatever that emotional challenge is that they have, right? The real, consequence that they personally, not the organization, but that they personally are worried about taking on because they are the person making the decision to move forward on this path.
It's funny. I've got a friend who, whenever someone complains to her about something or vents, she asks this question. She asks them, "Are you looking for advice, or do you just want to be heard?" And sometimes that's what's going on in the sales conversation, right? As they frame this objection, and you can't really say it that way, but the truth is sometimes they're not looking for an answer; they just want to be heard. And this goes back to one of the things I mentioned earlier about them trying to assess whether you're the right partner, right? And sometimes it's a very deliberate test, and sometimes it's not deliberate at all.
Mm-hmm.
But what they're looking for is, will you panic at that question, right? Are you so insecure in your ability to deliver results that you panic? And I can see you panic.
Mm-hmm.
Or will you get very defensive, right? Another sign of insecurity, right? Or will you give me some kind of, arbitrary guarantee trying to appease my request for risk reversal without having an intelligent conversation with me about where the risks actually lie? Because that could backfire.
Mm-hmm.
You say to a client, "Oh, everything's guaranteed. If it doesn't work, give your money back." If you ask me, if I'm the client, I'm like, red flag. What? Seriously? Red flag? Or something like that. That was an extreme example, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's a red flag, right? So often this is just a test. Like, can you have an intelligent conversation with me about how this might go wrong and make me feel comfortable moving forward?
Yeah. And are you coming into this discussion with like honesty and integrity? Because the reality is nothing is guaranteed 100%, right? Like it's just not, no matter how good you are, because you are not the only variable in this equation. Lots of things could happen within the client's organization, within the world at large, that may adjust the success, right? How quickly things move forward and what results you get. And often just the simple fact that you will nod and agree that there are some risks, that is often enough. Because what I know is that you're not just kind of, all sizzle no steak, right? Coming in here just with all sorts of fireworks and flash to sell me something shiny. You're really in it, right? You're going to walk beside me. You are going to be the person who not only recognizes that there may be risks, but ideally you're the person who identifies them when we get to that place, right? Where something isn't going, 100% as planned, as nothing ever does. I want to be sure that you, as my trusted advisor, are the person that says, "Oh, okay, hold on a minute. I can see that we're sort of veering off the path here for a reason A, B, and C. Now let's talk about how we get back on track." That's the thing that people want, not as much as we all think we want the magic bullet. What we really want in these complex engagements that, most of the folks who are listening are entering into is assurance that you are going to walk beside me and be the expert that mitigates the risk and helps me figure out my way through it.
And depending on the level of sophistication of the client, sometimes they're really not able to identify them themselves. And I think it's important to ask. But in the conversation I was referring to earlier, the gentleman said, "I don't know what I don't know. So it all sounds good, but I don't know what the risks are."
Yeah.
And then I said, "All right, no worries. There's 5. Here they are. Number 1." And I stated the risk, and we talked about it. And through the conversation, he said, "Yeah, that one doesn't really worry me for this, that, and the other reason." And then we didn't get to 2 to 5.
Did you have 5 lined up?
I had 3 to 5. Yeah. But they're the common things that can go wrong in an engagement. And we have mitigating factors for all of them built into the program and what we offer. But the point was, like, he just wanted to have some kind of conversation about risk. And we got through one of them, and it was a significant one. And that was enough to appease him and make him feel comfortable.